I've never sat down with each painting and actually narrated what's going through my mind when I look at it. So it's not going through my mind.
That's how you think of the titles.
Yeah.
The titles are, in fact, a narration. I want to repeat that because that sounded important. The titles, doing them afterwards, are your stock taking of what you've
Summation.
done.
It's a summary of what I've done. So I prefer to know very little. As I work, the painting tells me what it is that's coming next. I don't have that much control, and when I have thought that I should have control, it's always been the wrong thing to do for me. So these summaries, these little narrations only happen after the fact. I wouldn't know any of this going in, but they then prompt me to create those little narratives. And I think they're kind of goofy, and they're funny, and they're profound, and they're, you know,
there's many different voices in them, sort of like in the paintings themselves. I mean,
right, they're complicated. Well, this was a particularly difficult painting to make. It took many months to make this painting, and the only thing I knew is some kind of colors for this sort of blurry background. And so that background sat around for a very, very long time because I had no clue where to go. So I just painted the background and left it alone and went on to another painting. What I thought I would do was somehow connect the two sides of the painting with this long kind of swagged line, which became this strangely obsessive, looks like arteries and veins, right? And I didn't mean for them to look like arteries and veins. I just liked the color red and blue. That's all I knew about was, and I had a certain brush, which is called a liner brush. And the brushes are very important because the brushes dictate the move that can be made. What is possible? If I look at this brush,
sort of like golf.
Yeah, what is possible? What is possible with a liner brush is this lilting kind of freedom, and it feels very good to me sometimes to paint in that way. So you have all these myriad of lines that are painted, they're purple and blue and kind of a magenta, and they just felt very good to paint. So I just kept going back and forth and back and forth. It culminates in this kind of hairball. I like the idea of this hairball in the middle. Then I sat with that for a while, and I thought, well, that's I don't know, it's got to have something else happening. So I decided I would make the origins of these lines disappear. So I worked very hard to sort of submerge the lines, so you can't really
that's why they fade out.
You can't really see where they come from. That seemed like an important thing to me. And then I started to hate the hairball because it was too much like a hairball. So I just came back in with these kind of vaguely similar colors, and I began but it felt important to retain this kind of opening. And this, when I look at it, it reminds me very much of this bird called the bowerbird. And the bower creates a bower to attract a mate. And this, in fact, is a bowerbird. And the bower is an interesting creature because it is called the graphic designer of the bird world.
It landscapes. No, it landscapes.
Yeah,
I love you for even, we've never had a conversation about the bowerbird. The bowerbird is very important to me too. It builds a house, it gets berries and rocks, it literally landscapes like a driveway.
So it seemed like this became almost like a hub or a nest kind of image. That's all I knew about it. And I thought, well, okay, if that's going on, then there's got to be a bird around, right? So this bird,
which was the first bird, by the way, there's three.
This sparrow, yeah. He was right side up, which I didn't like. He was kind of hanging like maybe a fruit or a flower or something, that he was actually hanging inanimately rather than being an animated.
But the vine wasn't there yet.
But the vine wasn't there yet. So he's on this sort of
so he's hanging
cord.
Upside down
right.
With something that isn't really there.
And then these forms of life appeared because the painting seemed like it had almost inanimate. You've got this is kind of submerged.
And not organic.
You've got an empty nest kind of womb situation. So now come all these vines.
If you got to this and the coherence between all of this by accident,
but it
it's
isn't,
like why should
anyone
anyone bother?
Isn't conscious. That's what I mean.
Okay.
So like.
So you admit that it has that mastery to it, but you won't admit that you did it on purpose.
Right.
Okay.
I was going to ask, tell us about the purple flowers, where they came from, and how you painted it.
Well,
He obviously knows something.
Yeah, because it fits into the story.
I saw a purple flower not far from the front door.
Oh,
And I thought,
Your studio.
Of a studio, yeah. And I thought it was just an isolated purple flower. It was not even descriptive. It was only about this big. It was some strange form of a hibiscus or something. And I took a photo. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And then when it came time to somehow accompany these vines, I thought, well, that's such a great color. It's this magenta color. And so there are times in different paintings where I just paint with my hands. So all these flowers are painted with my fingers. And it feels good. I mean, I painted for about 5 solid years just with my fingers. I never used a brush.
I didn't
Years
know that.
ago.
But there's
Years
so
ago.
much detail in these. It's like these do not look like they were painted with your fingers.
Well, they were, honestly.
No, Amadeus and Peter, so she
I mean,
guys should.
there are a couple of white marks. There's a couple of white marks across there that were done with the edge of a palette knife by hitting the knife with paint. But they were painted with my hands, and so was
Is that
with
true
my
of
fingers.
wherever the purple flowers are?
Yeah, those purple flowers.
In those,
are
in
painted
this
with
one,
my
it seems
fingers.
like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm clear. But she's right, in these, it doesn't seem
Wow.
that nice.
But I painted with just my fingers and hands for about 5 years
See,
in the
that-
1990s.
so that's one
I
of
was
the-
very able to describe.
So you've got the rollers, you've got the fine hairbrush on the vines,
Right.
you've got the implement you described with these lines, you've got your hands with the purple flowers.
I have the #1 brush for the vines, and there, you'll often see these funny lines that sort of drop. They're like very straight lines, and I think what happens is when you were not, I was not trained technically. In the 1970s, people did not go to art school to be trained technically. They went to art school for ideas, concepts, to really engender in themselves a vision. What would your vision be? And that was the most important topic in art school. What's your vision? Where are you going? And the thinking was, if you had this vision, you would surely find the method by which you would describe that. If it meant that you had to start welding, if you had to do woodworking, if you had to paint in such a manner, whatever that manner is, you would figure out a way to do that for yourself. The virtue of having to start from nothing and find the skill set by yourself, kind of in a vacuum, because in the 70s people didn't paint that much.
Especially not at CalArts.
Oh, I didn't go to Cal.
No, but I mean,
But
the
especially,
California,
yeah.
you were here, I mean, is that kind, you were here, then you went to you went back to Europe
Right. So
in the middle of your education.
right, so our skill set was not given to us like it is today for the most part in art school. In art school you have these things called foundation departments, and they just get you through the rigors of a boot camp. This is how you draw a figure, this is how you draw perspective, this is how you paint with gouache, so everybody's doing something that looks kind of like everybody else. But the way I was trained is that given to one's own devices, if they were truly an artist, they would invent a way to make that vision manifest in the real world. You would figure that out for yourself. So the way I paint has all been figured out by me. I've never had anybody say to me, let me show you how light works on an object.
Despite your intensive education that you dedicated yourself to,
Right.
you ended up teaching yourself how to paint.
Right.
That's interesting.
And I still do. Like, for instance, the dandelions. See, I trip on those dandelions, the little heads of them, because I hadn't a clue how I was going to make that work. And I thought, well, you know what I can do? There's a particular brush called the beaver brush, and it's a certain number. And I would see, let's check that out. If the paint is very thick, and I use that particular brush, maybe that's going to make the right mark. Make the mark and go, oh, that looks pretty good. Now let me make about 4,000 others. It dries. I put on some black underneath that. It dries. I put more marks on top of it, and it's like, voila, there's some sort of space created.